Okay, so we've got just a short amount of time. Like I said, we'll hit on these learning intentions, but this is Brenda Combs. She's our monitoring results lead here at KVEC. She's our director. Between the two of us, we've written countless IEPs over the years. And one of the things, it's always good when we come out and do teacher modeling and teacher mentoring, is we get an opportunity to sit down and actually do it again. But we go way back to the old days before computers even, because Brenda has 41 years of experience. I'm starting year number 36 myself, and we both have been directors of special education, and we both worked here at Co-op. She's been here for several years, and I've been here going on 8 years now. So in the amount of time we have, we're just really going to take a hard look at what's in the guidance document, okay, and then also what it takes to develop a proper present level, and really being able to use student performance data to do that, and then also can we write compliant and goals that are measurable? Because if we talk about anything in this business, we understand that there is a need for data, and data that drives instruction, and data that tells us whether or not our children or our students are making progress on the annual goals. And so without further ado, we'll get into it. So here you've got just a screenshot of the brand new revised 2023 IEP guidance document. Now, one of the things I'll tell you about the guidance document is it has a very intricate table of contents, and it's hot in terms of if you click on steps for writing present levels 13, it'll take you right to page 13 in that PDF that's online. You can go to KDE's website and find this. And if you have a device and you want to pull that up right now, that's certainly okay with us. But this is what Brenda would call our definitive Bible. Now, do they have a copy of that, Brenda?
They don't have a copy of this.
Okay.
Because we can just go ahead and access it online.
Yeah, you can access it online. And so, really, what the area that we're going to focus on is writing present levels today, and then also writing goals, okay, from those present levels. And so, we can go on to the next slide. First thing I want you to do is I want you to get in a group, okay, and just kind of work with one another. And I want you to think about present levels. I want you to write a definition of what you think it is, just based on those words. What do you think present level means, okay? And then I want you to share that definition with your elbow partners here. And I want you to after you have a discussion, I want both of you, I want you to do it in a silo, okay? So this is a little engagement strategy. We talk about engagement and getting response, getting high levels of response. And so what I want you to do right now is I want you to work through this little engagement strategy piece right here. So in a silo, I want you to get out a piece of paper and write down what you think present levels are in terms of IEP. Now, are you brand new or have you taught a year or two?
A year.
You've taught 1 year? And how long have you taught?
No, I'm just here.
She's the
Second.
public relations officer for the Public
Okay. All right.
Relations Training Center.
Okay. All right. So just play along with
So
us then.
yeah, we'll play along
All right.
and do our best.
It's all right. So just what
So
are
she has-
present levels? What are present levels? So that's what we're kind of thinking about. Write down a couple, 2 or 3 bullets. And then after you do that, then have a conversation with one another here, okay? So we're going to force that conversation. So what we're doing is we're getting high levels of response. We're getting you to think about it. We're getting you to write about it. We're getting you to talk about it. We're getting you to rewrite it and reconsider it after you hear or maybe learn from your partner. And then be ready to share, okay? So let's just take just a second and think about present levels and see where that takes you.
And Jessica being the transition person, her present level outlook may be just a tad different from your academics, when you're writing this. You're different. Probably just a little bit here.
or two, share with your neighbor. Y'all just have a conversation about it. You tell what you think present level is, and then you guys tell her what you think present level is.
Present levels, very simply, how your students are doing academically.
Yeah, that's where they start at, where they're at ground level. They come to the classroom first day of school, where they're at.
So we're having ground level. I heard where your students are academically. I heard you say something.
Current level of functioning.
Current level of functioning. Okay, very good. And so, did any of your conversation prompt you to think about rewriting your definition? Anything that you heard from this group that would change yours, or anything you heard from her that would change yours? So that's what you're trying to get your students to do when you're considering a concept. You're trying to get them to consider, you know, and then they're bringing prior knowledge, background information, their prior experiences into the whole mix, right? You have different experiences than you do, and that's, you know, when you're talking about in a classroom, if you've got two teachers in there, it's really, really important to be able to group those students and really, you know, we really prescribe to station teaching. And what I mean by that is, if we're doing a co-teaching model and you've got a regular and special ed teacher in the classroom, can we get our students into small groups that have mixed ability, about 6 to 8 kids, maybe 10 kids at the most, in groups, and then we're providing them with instruction, and we're having them do different things at different centers, and they're learning at different levels, and they're different. The differentiation is involved, and there's different learning modalities that come into play. You know, can you hear it? Can you see it? Can you you know, work through it? That type of thing. So what we're always trying to do is, anytime we're teaching about compliance, we're also teaching good strategies. And so this is a forced engagement strategy where we say, think about the problem in a silo, write it down, have a conversation with your partner, then reconsider and be ready to share it. And you guys already shared. So anything, so let's go on to the next
Yeah,
slide.
I'm curious, you know, she's at Muncie in Leslie County, so she's at a K-8 school, correct? And so what grade bands are you gonna be working with?
4 through 6.
4 and 6 or 4 through 6?
4 through 6.
4 through 6. So I'm curious, Penny Paul, because I'm sure it looks a little bit different, depending on the school, the district, the grade band, actually assessing present levels of performance. Can we talk for just a moment about that?
Do what now?
About assessing present levels of performance and
Okay.
the tools that teachers will use to acquire that information? And does it look differently at an elementary school versus a middle or a high school? Or is the process that teachers go through the same?
Pretty much the same when you're doing, you have that initial evaluation, and you use that data and the RTI data to write that IEP along, you know, with all the teachers and parents. Then with your subsequent IEP, then you base that on the progress monitoring of the goals that you have written in that IEP. Like she said earlier, you know, where is the child at? You know, what can we do in 1 year that will increase those skills for those children to close that gap?
So that's a very good question, I think, and I think Brenda, hopefully she answered that. But so we were talking about the definition, right? So if you look here, this is a screenshot from your IEP guidance document, okay? It says a summary of information and data documenting what the student currently knows and can do in the following areas. Now, your sources are going to be different for each one of these, okay? So if we're talking about communication, we're looking at recent communication screening, we're looking at recent communication evaluations. It might focus on language development, or it might focus on being able to actually physically speak and, you know, not have a stuttering issue or have an articulation issue that comes up. And then when we get into academic performance, that's where we really hammer, because, you know, most kids are not in special ed unless they have academic performance issues, right? we know that to be eligible, you gotta meet one of the criteria, you gotta have an adverse effect on educational performance within the curriculum, and you have to need specially designed instruction, which is layered on top of core instruction and all that kind of good stuff. But areas of present level, these are the areas of present level. And so the other big piece is the social emotional status, your health, vision, hearing, and motor. This is where you're gonna see things like your ADHD kids and your OHI, other health impairment students are gonna come in here, and you're gonna have information that supports that diagnosis. You can't just take a doctor's statement and say, yes, they're eligible for special ed. They have to have an adverse effect. And you've gotta have some data in there, okay, in order to provide certain things. And we're going to get to those things that you have to have, right, in present level. So it's a summary of what the student knows and can do in all of these areas. Now, the key thing to remember is sometimes they're going to be commensurate in one of these areas, okay? What I mean by that is they're not going to have any issues. So there's a checkbox that you can check, okay? Now, some of these areas you can check the box, okay, and still put information in there. Like, for example, the kid may not need goals written or services in that regard, but you can tell them that, hey, this student needs to take medicine because they're 80. And so the one thing that you want to keep in mind when you're doing IEPs is they need to pass the stranger test, okay? And what I mean by that is, if you send your IEP down the road to her and she picks it up, she ought to be able to see that data, see those skills, and see that information that that student needs in order to just go right ahead and implement that IEP seamlessly. So we're always thinking about portability and movability and passing that stranger test when we write these things. So do we list strengths based on skills or superlative strengths? That's a question we want to come back to in just a second. So when we're talking about areas of present level, we know that certain things are going to have to go in certain places. If we leave the box unchecked though, if we say the kid's got some real issues here, okay, in this particular, let's say they don't read on grade level, okay, they don't read like their similar age peers, and they're 2 or 3 grade levels behind, then certainly you're not going to be able to leave that box unchecked academically, right? Certain disabilities. If you fall into the mild mental disability category and we're talking about general intelligence, you're not going to be able to leave the box unchecked because that student's going to have a significant deficit in their IQ, okay, that is significantly and consistently below the similar age peer, expected peer, right? So we've got to be able to know what goes where, okay? Transition needs is another one that's totally different. You're going to have the results of transition assessments, and you're going to list those transition assessments, and you're going to say, these are the outcomes of these transition assessments. And then you might have to take, like a lot of things we do in transition support is instruction. So we may have to take this one and link it to their daily living that we talk about here in social emotional, or we might have to link it to academic performance. If reading is keeping them from attaining or making progress toward attaining their transition goal, then we have to link it. You see, so all these things are separate, but sometimes they link up to one another. Okay, so I want you to see that. And so let's go back to my first thought. If it's commensurate, you check the box. If you have no concerns or needs, and if there's no deficits in that area, you check the box and you move on. You don't have to put data in there. But if you need to put data in there that kind of describes the student in regards to things that we need that are not going to lead to a goal, we can check the box, put information in. But now this next phase, what we're going to focus on is when we leave the box unchecked, are there things that make that present level compliant? And so that's what we're going to look at.
And make sure if they have allergies, those types of things, that we list that in that health part. We don't write goals about that, but teachers need to be aware that the child may have some type of an allergy.
Okay, so I want you to consider this question, or I want you to think about, kind of keep this in the background of your mind, okay, for when we're writing about student strengths based on skills or superlative strengths. Do we write superlative strengths, or do we write strengths that are based on what they can do, skill driven? Okay? And I think that kind of answers itself really, but we'll come back to that in a second. Okay? So, let's jump back here for just a second. So this is all about present level and about the basis for generating annual goals. We said we were going to do two things today. We're going to find out what has to go in present level, all right? And then we're also going to do what we're going to be able to write a measurable goal. So I went back a page. So if you're following along, so the present levels provide the ARC with a baseline of the student's strengths and needs. So there's two key words, or actually three key words. So write those words down in your margin there. Baseline, strengths, and needs. Okay? And this is straight out of the IEP guidance document. They are the foundation. So the student's strengths and needs and a baseline assessment of those needs are what we're talking about. They are the foundation on which the IEP is built and the basis for generating measurable annual goals, specially designed instruction, which students have to need before they can be in special ed, and the supports and services to be individual student needs. Now look at this, what I've got in this box. There should be a direct relationship between the information in this section and the measurable annual goals. Any short-term objectives or benchmarks that you write to support those measurable annual goals, to the attainment of those goals, and the accommodations developed and recorded in the rest of the IEP document. Copying the integrated report into the present levels does not provide the ARC with the information that's necessary to accurately support the development of goals. So, we now know 3 of the 4 required pieces. Actually, we want to make it 5, really. We have 3 of the 5 required pieces. Okay? So we got student strengths, student needs, of which we're going to look at the skills and determine what the baseline is for those, okay? And that's going to come in our progress monitoring piece later today, but really it's basically probing those discrete skills, testing the student on that, and coming up with a percentage or a number that we can put in there as quantifiable data. So when we were looking at present levels, if I come to your school and I pop your IEPs open, or Brenda looks at one and I look at one of the things that we're going to look for is, does your present levels have numbers in it? Plain and simple, if you don't have numbers, if you don't have percentages that speak to the baseline. And what is the baseline? The baseline is their starting point. If you can think about the starting point for them in terms of this is where they currently are functioning, what they know and what they can do right now, right? And they do it consistently. So to get baseline, and this is kind of precursor to the next section. To get baseline, would you just take one test measure? No. What's the rules say? Do you know? Do you have any idea? So we're going to talk about that later, but you would take about 4 measures to 6 measures. That's what the research says. 4 to 6 measures, and you would average those measures. And if you had an outlier, like if it was 50 points possible and they got 30, 30, 32, and then all of a sudden they got a 0, well then that 0 is going to really skew that data if you average those things. So there's ways to take care of that. The whole idea here is to set that baseline, right? So you're taking that information and you are saying, okay, this is where they currently can function. What grade level are they on? What does the state and district test tell us how they did? And we also, the last part of it, so let's think about it. Write this down. Write this down. Get your paper out, get your pencil out, write this down. I've got strengths, and I've got to know what they're able to do in reading. I got to know what they can do in math, daily living skills. I have to know some of that information. I need to include some of that information. Then I have areas where they're deficient. We've had screening information come our way. We've had test scores come our way. We've had all of these things come our way. And now we see, hey, the student's reading 3 grade levels below what their similar age peers are doing. That's a real concern. So now we got to probe it. We got to be an investigator there. We got to look and see what skill is it that we can prioritize for this student that's going to make the most bang for the buck in the next year, right? So we're going to work on a skill for a whole year, and it better be an important prioritized skill that's going to give him a lot of bang for his buck, right? Can't just jump in and work on reading comprehension if they can't read fluently, right? You see what I'm saying? So you got to break it down and really, really look and investigate. And the whole idea is you can't get an IEP right if you don't probe them and you don't test them and you get that average score on that particular skill. Now, where do you get that content from? Does it just come from the air? Where do you get the content from? We were talking about it over here a minute ago. Dion put that up there, right? She put that up, those standards. So we got to look at those standards. We got to be able to deconstruct those standards and see where it is our kids really have a problem. Because when the other piece of this, so we got strengths, we got needs, we got baseline, and we got their student performance data coming from all different directions, right? They may be taking a state test, they may be taking a MAP test, a district test, might be given a map all year to see how they're doing on the standards, right? And then the last part is adverse effect. We've got to be able to make a comparison between what's expected at that particular age and where they are. And that gap shows us that they need specially designed instruction, and there's an adverse effect on their ability to move through the general curriculum. And we layer our skills on top of that. We layer our instruction on top of that. And what we do with specially designed instruction is we take that daggone deficit area that we've probed, and we've determined where that kid's working, and we know where they got to go, and we've got to come up with special ways to get them there. Our students have cognitive overload. They've got working memory issues. They've got visual spatial issues. Maybe they process too fast or too slow. So they need extended time, or they need to be redirected. So all those things, we have to come up with special ways to teach that skill. And those goals are what we're doing that special instruction on, where we're adapting our content, we're adapting our methodology, we're adapting our delivery of instruction to match what they need right there in time. And so you can't call it special design instruction if you're not doing something that's intentional toward making that kid make some progress toward that attainment of that goal. Does that make sense? So now let's make sure we got those written down somewhere, because I may come back and ask you on retrieval of information from a blank slate, what are the 4 or 5 things that we have to have in present level, right? What do we have to have in present level? So it says we got strengths, needs, and baseline here, and then there's some other pieces, okay? Let's see if I can find the slides. Right there it is. Right there it is. So relative strengths, area in which a student performs well compared to students' own performance. Sometimes when kids have lots of issues, if they're MMD, FMD, if they have we have to prioritize, and we have to look at what they can do well compared to themselves in order to rise strengths in that area. So that's when we say relative strengths. Like you might have an MMD kid, and when you look at their psychological report, you might go into that psychological report and say, okay, in the area of general intelligence, he's got 5 scores. Well, he's really low in working memory. He's really low in processing. But his visual spatial integration is really high. So that would be a relative strength for him compared to himself. You see what I'm saying? So here are the areas. For each area presently where the student is not commensurate, describe relative strengths, describe needs and concerns, describe baseline performance, and what performance level in relation to similar age peers. And then the other outline piece here is disability. Okay? Whatever disability brings them to the dance, we got to treat. And we got to treat it first. It says treat that first, whatever the disabling condition is, and then any other problem that emanates from the disability. Okay? So what do I mean by that? All right? student is SLD, specific learning disability in reading, okay? But they also have some behavior issues, okay? Do we just let the behavior issues go because they're not EBD? No, it's pretty clear, Brenda. What's it say about that?
It says anytime that there is another disability, that we just add that to that. So if you have an SLD student and they have OHI issues, they're not OHI and SLD, they're still SLD, but we still have to address that behavior or those issues that the child still has. It's a wraparound program.
Yeah. And there's this whole thing of prioritization. So if you've got an MMD student, they got reading issues, they got math issues, they got writing issues, they got daily living issues, they've got adaptive behavior issues throughout, they socialization, maybe it's behavior. So you go, man, I've got a 12, 15-page IEP. But what you do is you look at that and you say, all right, what skills are going to make the most bang for the buck in the next year that are going to help this kid make progress in the curriculum? You still have to give access to the curriculum, right? So you have to give them things like accommodations, extended time, readers and scribes and those types of things so that they can be exposed and actually work within the curriculum that's expected at their grade level. But then you also have to think about the IEP as a vehicle to layer on top, closing the gap, working on those prerequisite skills that may be missing. And we're trying to pick out skills that are going to close that gap quicker. When they've got a bunch of things wrong, we got to chunk. You see what I'm saying? Go back to that term we talked about over here. We got to chunk some things. And so I know I'm jumping around a whole lot, but really we're focusing on present levels, and that's the foundation of the IEP. Go ahead.
So it's interesting to me that in this new teacher training today, we actually have a K-8 new teacher.
Yes.
Right? So you've never, this is.
Just taught 1 year.
Oh, you have taught 1 year. Okay. So, yeah, it takes a few years to settle in. So it's curious to me that with our special educators, whether they're going into their second year or maybe this is their first year, and even though they've been trained in the theoretical underpinnings of IEP.
No, I'm not a special education teacher. I just.
Oh, you're not?
No,
Okay.
no.
Oh, interesting. See, I thought you were a special education
No,
teacher.
I just thought that it was,
Oh,
like
no.
having a special ed teacher come to my classroom. I had 2 come to my classroom last year, and out of the presentations, I thought that it'd be nice to learn some more. Because they're always spitting out all this stuff about IEPs,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm like, I want to know more about
that's
what they're
brilliant.
doing. So I know going into these meetings with these parents, I can talk
Oh,
well.
That's good.
That's smart.
That's exactly what you
I
have.
wish more.
Okay, so let's
teachers-
dive a little deeper on present level here for a
So here's
second.
what I wanted to ask real quick, Danny Paul, and it may not be germane to this conversation at all, but again, it's interesting to me that you have special education teachers who are gonna inherit IEPs that they have to continue to develop, right, from year to year, and update, progress monitor, and all that stuff. And then, based on our summer institute last week, we had Miss Cindy Richardson, who's the director of special education for Floyd County Schools. And she did sessions all day, and it really, the big umbrella was about eligibility. And she kind of walked the teachers through the entire eligibility process, which of course is connected to the development of the IEP, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I guess what I'm thinking about is trying to contextualize how special ed teachers have to process not only the IEPs that they inherit, but those that they have to develop for the first time based on the guidance and this very complex and sophisticated rubric
You have 2 different kinds.
with lots of pieces and parts.
Just
So,
to get-
again, this may not be germane to the conversation, but we have those, I think we have those cases that are occurring all the time, every year.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And so you have 2 different types of IEPs that you're going to be, especially if you work at the
That
elementary level.
could be kind of
And you
scary.
do, right? So you get those kids that are initial, right? Those first timers. First time you're ever going to write an IEP. Where's that information come from? How do we get baseline? So It says during an initial IEP meeting, the ARC reviews available data about the student, including classroom data, the results of evidence-based interventions, and formal and informal assessment data. If test scores are used, explanation of the interpretation of the scoring should be provided. So, this is the question you gotta consider. We gotta be able to dive into, because in order to make it through the referral process and get to eligibility, you have to have been provided interventions at tier 3, right? And that's an intense intervention. And if those interventions have been done with fidelity and there's been data taken on those, that should work seamlessly for you to be able to pull those skills out. Like, for example, if you're working with reading, there's 5 areas of reading. So we're not going to just write a goal in reading. We're going to either write it in fluency, we're going to write it in being able to use phonics, or phonemic awareness, or the ability to manipulate sounds into words, or fluency, or can we read a sentence and make sense out of it? And can we answer questions about comprehension, those things? So it could be all those things. And so we got to be able to pinpoint what it is that the student is deficient in order to be a candidate for special education. And so we're looking at all that and we're saying, okay, now can we discern what the baseline is? Because remember, in order to write that first IEP, we got to be able to determine what his baseline is on a particular skill. Okay, so hopefully the RTI and the data around MTSS is strong enough that we're able to pull from classroom data, we're able to pull from the results of evidence-based interventions to get that baseline. If you don't have that, you really don't have a candidate for special education. You know, if he's not had proper instruction, he's not supposed to be qualified, right? So our districts have some work to do in this area, okay? But some are doing better than others. And I know that you're aware of it because I see you shaking your head about tier 3 intervention, tier 2 intervention, and we need to be able to dive in and say, oh, this is what we're going to work on. And then, so I've got this key question, can we turn what we know into a discrete skill that can be measured? So the whole idea is if we're looking at how many words per minute a student can read, that's a discrete skill that we can time, that we can measure, and that we can say, all right, on day 1, he's on grade 2, he's actually supposed to be in grade 4, but he's working on grade 2 words, and he can get this many in 1 minute. And then that's the baseline. We've done that 4 to 6 times, and we've determined what his average number is. And then we set a goal out here that's going to be his, where we're going to. We're trying to get him, remember, closer to grade level performance. And so that's what we do with initial. And then when we have the students in a year, here's what we do. So we look, I think I went backwards. We have this thing called an annual review. Guess what? On that ARC notice, it says we're going to review and revise the IEP. So what do we have to talk about in that meeting?
Whether we think we should keep them in tier 2 or maybe tier 1, right? Is that what we discussed that?
Well, no, we're talking about once they're already in, so the tiers are out the window. Okay, they're already in, they've had that initial IEP. I jumped ahead here. I'm sorry. Yeah. They've been in a year, now we're having an annual review. So what we're going to look at
Make
is
sure if it worked or not, right?
if it worked or not. Yes, we're going to review those goals and see what level they ended up on. And then we'll bring that ahead. And you know, there was this big old case that went to Supreme Court in Drew. And I've talked about it until it's blue in the face. And everybody's heard it. But it really says don't copy and paste those goals unless you've got a good reason to copy and paste those goals. And so where did that kid end up at the end of the cycle after that first year? Can we bring that forward? Do we need to keep it the same? Do we need to adjust the grade level that we're working on? So those are the questions, those are the things that we would talk about in the ARC meeting. Did they master that goal? Do we need to write a new goal? If we do write a new goal, what do we have to do? We have to create another baseline, don't we, on another skill. Or it might be another baseline on another skill on another level. You see what I'm saying? So that's so important. So for the development of subsequent IEPs, when you see that subsequent IEP, it means any IEP that you write after that first one is finished. All right? The ARC documents the discussion of student performance and reviews available data, including IEP progress data. The student performance data documented in the present level section of the IEP may be obtained from the sources below: baseline instructional data and IEP progress monitoring data. So we have to keep progress monitoring data all year. We've got certain things we have to do with that. There's a place to put it, Infinite Campus, that kind of thing. We're going to talk about that this afternoon, so I hope you'll come back. And so we're looking at your progress from the goals. Do I keep the same goal? Do I need a brand new goal? Right? And do we know where the student's baseline is coming forward? Okay? What was it? So at the end of the cycle, we look back to 4 to 6 data points and take an average of that and bring it ahead. And then we make a decision. Do we need a new goal? Do we stick with that same goal? Lots of times you're going to stick with that same goal, especially when they're smaller. You're going to stick with that same goal. Sometimes you've gone as far as you can go with that goal. That goal, maybe they mastered the goal, we write a new goal, right? So thinking about goals, we write what we can do in a year, right? So let's talk about this information right here is using student performance data. These are some of the places where you can get data from, okay, to write your present level. And we're going to skip ahead on that because we're going to get into measurable goals here for a second. So here's your IEP development process. We start with present levels and we talk about special factors. But we're going to jump over special factors. Special factors are things like behavior and being able to hear and see and having communication issues and Braille and those types of things. And those are all must be supported by consistent data in the present level. And the need for those, having a special factor has to be supported by data that's included in the present level. Those things need to be consistent. But we're going to jump over that and talk about this next step here, this measurable goal, okay? And as you can see, it cycles around. When we go through all these pieces, we come back around and we talk about present levels again, right? And over here, we've got transition. Once a kid gets to 14, we start talking about transition as the lens we look through in order to provide all these services. And the outcome for that is to attain that post-secondary goal of getting a job, going and getting training services, and what you're going to do with it after you get done, right? Go get a job, that kind of thing. So, let's jump ahead here just a second. Let's click all this message.
Danny Paul's got a lot of energy.
Always misses. So we got through present levels. Okay, let's back up for just 1 second. So we got vague phrases on the left. We got phrases that have data on them. See the difference between those? That's just a visual to let you see. When we read your present levels and they've got numbers in them, we know we're in a pretty good place. Then we start looking for your progress monitoring data to see if there's graphs and things like that, right? But if we see present levels written like this that are vague and weak, and it's the real description without any proof that that's really where the kid's functioning, right? So this is what they say in special ed. If you don't have the data, write the check. Okay? So if you go to a court of law, you don't have data in your IEP, go ahead, district, write that check, right? So, do present levels require data? The answer is definitively yes, right? Data is present on the right-hand column. That's where we want specific phrases with data to support. Because data is the only thing we've got to prove that we implemented and that we've actually worked with the kid, okay?
This is really good.
Might go backwards again.
It doesn't matter, we'll stay with you.
Here we go, measurable annual goals. So, remember I said measurable annual goals are statements of anticipated results to be achieved in a calendar year or sooner as determined. Measurable goals are not written to restate the content standards. So we wouldn't just go in there and say, well, we're going to cite textual evidence. Okay, that might be the behavior piece, but we got some other things to do besides that, right? And we got to be able to delineate that let's say we want to deconstruct that standard and bring it down to a level of a discrete skill that we can measure, that we can see, we can count, we can hear, we can time. Okay, and so goals to be achieved in 1 year or less. We're not going to restate the content. We're going to promote access to the general curriculum and appropriately write goals that are appropriately ambitious. Okay? So if a kid is functioning, right now his baseline is on second grade level, we might want to think about writing that goal on third grade level, right, Brenda? Brenda talks about that all the time, and she taught me that a long time ago. You want to reach, if you don't set those expectations high, and that Andrew, this is language that comes from the Andrew case, okay? And if we had a lot of time, I'd tell you all about that, but I don't have a lot of time to do that right now. But honestly, the goals are to be written ambitiously, and it's to meet the kid in light of their unique circumstances. So what's that tell you? The IEP's got to be individualized. It can't be like every other kid. If I come and look, I call it a vertical folder review, and I look 1 through 15 of your folders, and every one of them has the same goal, we got a problem. Every one of them has the same accommodation, we got a problem. Everyone has the same service, we got a problem, right? It's individualized. We got to meet them in light of their unique circumstances. These goals should be designed to meet the needs resulting from the student's disability. Okay? So we got to make sure we're taking care of the big pieces of the disability. If it's other health impairment, it's going to be behavioral most of the time, right? Off-task behaviors, that type of thing, right? If he's ADHD and that's how he got in, we've got to attack that first. If he's got some reading issues that are also being caused by which one came first, the chicken or the egg, then we do that as well. But we have to first attack that behavior and then attack those academic issues. Okay, so that's a little bit about goals there, and that's straight out of the guidance document again. And I would encourage you to look at that guidance document. So annual goals must not simply copy and paste the IEP goal from one year to the next. We've already kind of talked about that, so no copy and paste. If we do copy and paste, it can be an denial of faith, and it can make your district have to provide compensatory services, which is back up and do it again, provide those services just about comparable or minute for minute. And does a repeated goal meet appropriately ambitious standard? If we continue to repeat and copy and paste the same old goal over and over, is that really ambitious for that student? And the ARC must review progress and revise, okay? So let's look at what a goal should look like, if we can get to it. So what's the purpose of the goal? It's to bridge the gap from baseline to the end of the end goal, or where we're trying to get in a year, right? Each goal must have enough detail to allow for objective measurement, okay? So there's some things that we have to do. We can show you that's right in that guidance document that will help you make those behaviors measurable and put the method of measurement that you're going to review that and you're going to measure that behavior with, that's going to work, okay? So those are the key. And here's one thing I want to say, and Brenda and I see this all the time. We'll get some big long goal, it's 9 miles long. And I tell you who's real bad about this is speech people. They'll put about 5 different skills in one goal. Don't do that. One goal, one skill. One method of measurement, right? And maybe 2 if you use authentic. Sometimes you need to have an interview with a student to find out what the process is that's making them make the mistake, right? But you'd still have to pair that with another method of measurement. And I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but so no copy and paste. We come back to that. No copy and paste, right? Make sure we don't copy and paste, because that's what got Andrew in trouble, as well as not having data, okay, and not including the parent in the decisions. So here are the pieces that are required. We've got this. It's real simple. It's easy to remember A through F, right? Here are the pieces. Audience. That's where we state the student's name. All right. The behavior. What observable action will the student perform? That we'll talk about discrete skills. Things like read and answer questions, right? Solve math problems, right? Those types of things. Circumstance. This is usually the phrase that comes first, and I'll show you that in just a second. It describes the instructional materials, circumstances used to teach and measure the behavior. So you're setting it up. Under these conditions, the student's going to perform this skill that we're going to measure and take data on. Does that make sense? In a small group within the general education classroom, provided these scaffolds, it might be even that long, right? It might be special circumstances that set it up so that we can view and see if that kid can actually do what we want them to do. And then there's this degree criteria. How well and consistently must the student perform this skill? Degrees, the percentage, the criterion is how many times he has to do it consecutively, or 3 out of 4, 3 out of 5. We don't want to just take it on one time. We want to see that they can do it consistently, so that we're seeing some permanency. It's becoming a permanent skill, right? That's what we're after. Remember, learning, permanent, from working memory to permanent memory, right? All right. And then this evaluation method of measurement, this E part, is how will the implementer measure student progress? What tool will we use? What resource, what assessment will we use to measure student progress? And that's a specific one. And I was just listening to a lady talk about this same thing yesterday, and she said, we want to see you embed the tool in the goal, okay? And then that last piece is F, that frequency of data. How frequently will we commit to taking data? Just say this, the more data you take, the stronger your information is. That drives your instructional change, that drives telling us whether or not the trend is toward permanent attainment of the skill, okay? So very, very important. Keep doing that. All right, so you can see I put them in different order. Circumstance, audience, behavior, degree criterion, frequency of data collection, evaluation, or you could vice versa those really. But the template or the example that the State Department uses is Mary will orally define when given content-related vocabulary words, 18 of 20 words correctly for 4 consecutive probes with a weekly checklist, right? Now later we'll talk about this part right here. We'll talk about how we have to turn that into certain types of data, because it will help you, especially if Shannon wants you to use Infinite Campus Goal Monitoring tab to do your progress data, right? So all of these methods of measurement have to turn into about 3 or 4 different methods of measurement. Okay, you got to be able to turn it into a quantifiable piece, right? So here we go. Given these circumstances, the student will perform this behavior with this goal of meeting the degree, it said 90% on 3 of 4 trials, as measured by a frequency count or an event recording. What would we leave out? This frequency. That's what's throwing me there. You think words like weekly, or twice weekly, or monthly, right? So we'll dive deeper into that progress piece this afternoon.
Does that depend on the student, or?
Depends on the student, depends on the skill.
The skill,
It
yeah.
depends on, like, for example, behavior, you would want to take more data, right? If you're trying to change behavior, you're trying to decrease a negative and replace it with a positive behavior, it's probably you're going to take data every couple of days or so. But if you're looking at reading it, you wouldn't see that improvement, and there would be no need to take a measure every day in reading. You see what I'm saying? So, and especially if those behaviors are frequent, and the kid's hitting somebody 5 times in an hour, we want to, we got to take data on that, right? It's important, because we want to diminish that skill, right? We want to decrease that and get him doing other things. Brenda, I see you furrowed your brow there.
Oh, no,
Was you thinking about something? You want to say something?
this is so important, but if you can get that A through F and understand those pieces, then you can follow this through. It doesn't have to be an A through F order like he said, the C came first there. A lot of times you see the C there become first. Most of the speech therapists, they do put theirs in the middle of it. We just need to make sure that we have that discrete skill. We'll read, we'll write, we'll solve. Like he says, you have to time it.
I know what you're getting at, and I know what you want. She's saying to you, can you have all the components and it still not be measurable? Yeah. Yeah, you could have. You can have all the components in there. But if the skill is not observable, and you can't turn it into numbers, then it's not measurable, right? So I could show you some examples if we had more time, but we're talking about if the skill, like, for example, we might say increase, right? as our verb, as our behavior. Increase. Well, you can't measure increase.
Be specific on
It has to be a specific thing that you see them do, that you can count your time and see, so that you can number it, you can measure it in length, or you can measure the delay in establishing the start point, right? So those are the three big pieces that we'll get to. So, are we close?
I'd say, yeah.
All right, let's take just a second now. Let's take just a second. Get your paper out and write me down 5 things that go in present level, and then write me down the 6 components of the measurable annual goal. Real quick. The 5 pieces that go in present level and the 6 components of a measurable annual goal. All right? Gotta get it off the, let's give them the answer there.
I saw that.
Yeah. Now, the whole idea here would be for you not to use scaffolds, right? But when you're doing retrieval practice from a blank slate, if you get your kids doing it, you might ask the student that has a little disability issue going on, can you give me 2? So you can scaffold it that way, right? But the whole idea is to get them to recall it from a blank slate, so they're not looking at anything, okay? And then prior to that, if you're doing your we do stuff, you would have scaffolds. You might give them graphic organizer, you might give them some reminders, you might teach them mnemonic, and that's where special design instruction comes in. So how did we do it? Did you test yourself? Did you get it? So we would check and see, did I get all 4 or 5 pieces? What were the 4 or 5 pieces that were required in present level? Give me one. Baseline. Did you have one over here? Did you have one? From the present level, what's required in present level?
Performance compared to peers.
Yes. And what about you, Will? Did you have one?
Student performance grade.
Student performance data. So we got strengths, we got needs, we got baseline, we've got comparison of the disability is always going to be that overarching thing. We're going to look through that lens. Yeah, there's a 5th, adverse effect. And that's really comparison to same age peer, similar age peer, and then that student performance data. What is that? What's their current level of performance telling us? Do we have state and district? Now let me layer something else on here that we've not talked about, because we're so programmed to follow this guidance document. This guidance document is best practice in lots of ways, okay? It's not what's in the regulation. You know what else is in the regulation? Parent concerns. Okay? Is that right, Brenda?
Yes, they're taken into consideration.
And so you got to put parent concerns in your conference summary, because you typically don't put those parent. You can put parent input in the present level, but you typically.
He's on a roll. We want to.
You typically would document that you ask the parent, what do you think needs to go into the development of the IEP? And you hook them into telling them some things they think that their kid needs to work on. And that you get them to help you write those goals, right? And so then they can't argue with you about it, right? Because they were the author as well as you. You're co-authoring. And you document that you include. You know why we do that? Because it was a major missing piece in the Hendry case that got to the Supreme Court that talks about what we do to provide faith. And one of those things that we do to provide faith, which is what special ed teachers do, is to make sure the parents are involved. Okay? Thank you, guys.